Welcome, everyone, to Practice Live. Humble apologies for being a few minutes late today. My internet decided to completely not cooperate. So I am here at my beloved neighbor's house, and I'm so grateful that they have let me just crash their yard. Let's talk a little bit about what Practice Live is. Practice Live is a monthly broadcast where we drop in with folks from all over the world to talk about what it means to really be here. And the anchor is practice. I've had a daily practice since I was 17. And for the last 3,500 days approximately, which is 10 years, I've painted every day as a way of really being here. And these conversations started in the back end of my practice some years ago because we were in some conversations of what it means to be in practice. Sometimes it looks like doing something every day, and sometimes it looks like committing to a quality that underpins presence. So today we're going to drop in with Gabrielle Wildheart and talk about what it means for her to really be here. And it's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to have you here. I just posted a little bit in my stories about our meeting. And I actually just put out a newsletter of you and I met at Barter Fair some years ago. I have no idea exactly how many, maybe four,
Yeah, I
3 or
think
4.
more,
More
but
than
I'm
that.
yeah.
And I was really struck by your warm and wild presence. There's something really devotional and something really wild, there's something a little wild about your presence. And your art reflects that. There's some there's some blending between the inner world and the outer world in your work. And I deeply relate to that. The environment tends to be part of the people, and the people are part of the environment. And I've always really loved that about your work. And we've been watching each other for some years. And then earlier this year, you approached me about working together because I posted something about marriage. And you began to recognize this call towards what I would call community ministry. So and it's
Mhm.
just been such a sweet development of more closeness with you in this last almost year, 6 months or something. I don't know.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's
So
been a testament to how you don't always know how the connections you make are gonna blossom. Because I grabbed a painting of yours at Barter Fair, and it's been in my studio wall ever since, and we never saw each other again for years except for
yep,
online, and yeah, now we're back in each other's orbit, and
yep.
couldn't have predicted it at the time, but it's wonderful.
I love that. We can't really know how connections are going to blossom, what's gonna move from them. That's a
Mhm.
sweetness. Um, yeah, so I would love to hand the floor over to you and have you talk a little bit about yourself. What's important for us to know about you and how you spend your time and how you've arrived at what your life looks like at this time.
Great. Well, I'm Gabrielle Wildheart, and I'm a full-time painter and public artist and a rabbit farmer. And I live on Vashon Island in a tiny home and on some acres that we rent. We rent land from a friend here and have some buildings on this land. And I have been committed to my craft full time, I'd say, since I came of age at 18. I mean, I always knew I wanted to be an artist. And when I reached the point in my life where I had agency to direct how I would be living my days, I committed to that path full time at that point. And I had the incredible privilege and blessing to be pretty successful as an artist at a young age. So, starting at about 18, art started to become part of my professional income, and sometimes more, sometimes less. I worked other jobs, but by the age of 30, I was making a full-time living from my art, and along the way had a tremendous amount of professional experience and got to travel around the world and experience a lot of different commissions and lifestyles and types of making. And so I bring this up because I'm it's unusual in that I've spent my whole adult life sort of outside the traditional system of 9 to 5 life um, of employment and capitalism, and I've had this good grace to direct my own days for a very long time. And so a lot of my formation as a person, because in your 20s, your brain is still forming, really happened outside of those traditional roles, traditional pipelines from, high school to college to the 401k job or whatever. And I feel that I haven't experienced a lot of um, limitations or feelings of being stuck or trapped or oppressed by society because of that. And, we all do to some degree, but really, I've had this blessing to have a lot of success in an alternative model my whole life. And what that means to me is that I feel it's a tremendous responsibility to kind of be an anchor point for that type of freedom in the world. And hopefully, when people are working with me, when we're in relationship with each other, when they visit my house, they get to feel the permission to kind of throw off that mantle themselves, or to be fully seen in their freedom or the alternative lives they're living. And I think especially right now, as we're seeing real disease and crumbling of this overarching system, it's just really so important that all of us who can just anchor into the earth in a new way, in a new old way, in a different way, and just be kind of safe havens for each other and for all the people who are actively trying to build something better. So that is my call right now, and part of why obviously Meg and I really connected, because I see her as sort of a fellow anchor point for forging her own way on the fringe, on the edge zone, and outside of the main matrix, so to speak.
Ooh, rad. I love so much of what you just said, highlighting this being an anchoring into earth in new and old ways, and be safe havens for each other, particularly those of us who are seeking to build something better. Yeah, yeah, and being formed outside, being formed at the fringe.
Mm-hmm.
That's another piece that's I heard you highlight as important. I deeply relate to that. I've always had, um, I've always been, I've always been at the fringe. um, Growing up in a mixed heritage, very untraditional family, in some ways very untraditional ways, and also in some other ways culturally traditional ways. It's been interesting to navigate what it looks like to honor that formation, and also honor the emergence of something new happening in this current Western context.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's always at that fringe, but it just seems like we're really at a dynamic edge right now of imagining something new. We're really beginning to imagine something new collectively. There are a lot of factors in that. Yeah. Um, Man, what does it look like for you in practice to be a safe haven for others who are seeking to build something different, something better?
Mm, that's a great question. Well, I think it always starts with yourself. So part of my practice is just being right within myself each day. And I do that in a number of different ways through my own artistic practice as a primary one. But I mentioned rabbit farming. That's kind of a new thing that's come into my life in the past year. And the being in the presence of animals, being present with animals and in service to them is also a practice that gets me right in myself. Um, so all of these things are kind of come first. And then when I'm in that place, I then can, I feel, relate to the world sort of as a bridge and be yeah, in communion with the people, whether it's, I teach yoga, whether it's my yoga students or someone at the bank or in the grocery line, just a a presence and a realness that I'm, hoping to start the connection from. So just in a very like basic way on how I move through my day, um, I think I'm cultivating presence in myself first, and then hopefully maintaining that presence as I move through the world and not kind of habitually falling into the flow of traffic of that's out there, when you go into the kind of herd. Um, and then also, I'm intentionally cultivating spaces as a facilitator and group leader where people can join me in practice. So I hold women's groups where we gather in devotion to the moon, or also in devotion to our own physical bodies through somatic pleasure and movement, yoga, dance, action, music. And then I hold some group art classes, and my art classes are always both a balance of technique and also the animate relationship to the materials and to what is awakening in yourself as you create the art.
Oh, yes. If I were in my own spot right now, I would maybe be louder. Um, I love what you're touching in on, not to repeat everything you just said, but I could, around, getting right with yourself, through cultivating that, at the top of your day, and then maintaining it, hopefully maintaining it throughout the day versus, like, following traffic. I love how you said that. Um, yeah, a thing that I've been sitting with for a long time is I like not going with the flow. I don't really wanna go with the flow. It's like kind of like a it's like a saying, like, "Go with the flow." I'm like, "I don't wanna go with the flow." I don't wanna go against the flow either. I wanna be a presence in the flow. I wanna have some agency, not control, but, like, agency in my awareness, agency in, how I move and act and speak, and what my participation is. And I feel
Mm,
like, yeah, you touched in on this too, of like these avenues for that. And this kind of gets into the next question a little bit of like, what are the intersections between art and community ministry? I feel like creativity, making things, participating in both destroying, like seeing something and like kind of molding things or destroying things, participating in things like that, allow you to recognize your presence in the process, if you can drop into awareness about that, really actually situates you in relationship with more than not, and I would say more than human. Like,
mm,
to participate in creating is to situate yourself in relationship with earth, it situates you in relationship with the divine, it situates you in a relationship because you have to acknowledge the hurdles that are there, and, sometimes it's getting started, like, s doing anything at all.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
acknowledging the hurdles and then actually taking that step and, manipulating materials in order to, like, move with the vision, and then going in further in with that. But I'm curious what comes up for you as you feel into specifically how creativity and art making, moves you into that presence that can anchor you in your own flow, in your own presence, so that you're not just going with traffic of the world of other people's deal.
Yeah. I'm going to answer that. And I want to first just tell a story about not going with the flow because I was just sitting by the creek. Well, it's more of a small river, the Little Quilcene River. And I was watching the salmon come home. And they do not go with the flow. They are fighting the river with their whole body and they're dying in the process, but also spawning. It's incredible, right? And that's just a part of their life. They also have a part of their life where they flow down the river, but they know wind. It's a conscious choice. And then I was also reading about beavers recently and how they architect the rivers for maximum health. Again, they are not just going with the flow of the river. They are one little twig at a time directing things consciously. So I think there are all these examples in the natural world that we can be inspired by when we are becoming aware that it's a moment to not go with the flow. And there are a lot of moments like that. Um, so in terms of like the artist's role in that, gosh, I it's something my whole life been trying to really understand, and I'll probably spend my whole life trying to fully develop a thought about it. But I think a lot about the earliest art and how it was part of ritual or part of ceremony or a sacred object, and you can't really separate. And there's, these cave paintings with beautiful hands made of red ochre, some of the oldest murals in the world, right? And something that strikes me about these paintings is that they're not one person's hands. There's everybody's hands. Some of the hands are left-handed, some are right-handed, and some are little children's hands. So there's just this collective making that's happening, and you can't really separate the art from whatever was going on that culturally, ceremonially, ritually that caused them to make the art. So I think there is this ancient marriage between the shaman, the mystic, the pastor, the priest, whatever, the oracle, and the artist. And I think that's where it all originates from. There's a anthropologist that studies what art is in culture. Her name's Ellen Desanayaki, and she says art is the act of making special, of expressing love for something, and signaling to the community, this is important, this is special, this is central to us. And that's kind of where it comes from: decorating, painting, placing something in a prominent position, altering it so that it's more eye-catching. Like, these are all ways of making special and showing love. And I love that read on it. And yeah, and then we've gotten to this place now where we have this separation in art. It's like, when I was in art school, I went to art school, it was actually like a bad word to talk about spirit or love or God or anything like that. And yet we're all these, children artists in the program, kind of making from our inner spirit and our inner God, and yet we can't talk about it. So it was very strange. So I think we have to reclaim that. I think we have to take art back from honestly, kind of from a lot of the gallery spaces in the museums, even though I love those spaces, but we really have to bring it back into the temple and also back into our communal lives in this sacred way. And so, like, the artist minister, the artist spiritual leader is, there's somebody who they are tapped into source through their practice of art, and art breaks through the veneer, right? It helps us to feel more. So this is a person that is actively in the practice of feeling a lot and communing a lot with the more than human. And so they have a pretty live wire that they can activate. They have a open channel that is flowing. The river of ideas is coming through, and so it makes sense that then that's a person that's going to have a lot of spiritual wisdom for others, and that people are going to recognize and be drawn to, because we're all artists and we all want to activate that part of ourselves.
Mic drop on that sermon. My soul just like bubbled up with so much excitement in response to everything you just said, from like the hand mural to to the live line, the live wire. There's so much intersection between sacred archetypes and the artist. Christine Waltner's Painter talks a lot about this too, about the intersections of contemplation, the monk and the artist, that they're both moving from a similar authority. And you're touching in on this too, of like, and actually I'm thinking so much of Ellie Milan's stance. I went through the Milan Institute recently because I just was like, I just needed, it's a year-long painting program, and it was so much more than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like, I just want to learn how to oil paint. And like, this was like surprisingly so deep in terms of personal development. And one of her stands is that is reclamation of beauty as a way of communing with the God of our hearts. Like, beauty is more than aesthetics. It's a direct line to a more generous reality. And I feel like I have a similar stance of this that I heard you say, of like, I've always talked about practice being my anchor for creativity because I don't want to put so much pressure on the muse. The muse gets to move how and when and at the size and speed and scope and scale that she wants to. Like, and she does. She rips through, but she finds me when I'm working. And that practice, like my dedication, my devotion, my showing up every day, my willingness to like meet that space in which something more can break through, and I'm not just seeing what is. Particularly in this current context, I don't just want to see what is. I want to be able to see into more. I want to be able to imagine something new. But I've always talked about creativity being like we make love, we make beds, we make conversations. Like, what happens when we maybe not instead of elite spaces, but in addition to really creating points of access? You touched in on this earlier of like, what does it look like to really be anchors, or be embodiments of the fringe, or like, just have a stand, having a place at the fringe in which people can see more pathways for creativity, more pathways for sacred engagement, instead of it requiring an intercessor, whether for me, whether that's a holy conversation of like needing the intercessor of the priest or the pastor, or needing the intercessor in the art world of the gallery or the elite space, really bringing it more into our daily awareness, and those of us who are willing to like live that, that become thresholding anchors of that as a reality. Like,
Wow. Yeah, well, something that was coming up for me when you were talking is like how all of these art practices, they're at their highest level, they're sublime, creations of God. You've seen art pieces where you're like, that piece is alive, right? And or that song is going to last, is going to endure in humanity for thousands of years because it's so powerful. And not every time you make art, it's gonna, like, most people will never make something like that, and that's okay. And yeah, like at the same time, singing and sculpting in clay and working, these are tools that all of us should be using all the time. And so maybe being an anchor, part of what it really fundamentally means is kind of creating space where there's that permission to play and make and engage with these tools without the pressure of selling something, performing something, making something that is going to endure 200 years. What happens if that's not at all the point? And in fact, it shouldn't be the point. So, that's kind of just, I'm just talking as I'm thinking, but yeah, I think like some of my actual profound breakthroughs have happened when I'm even making something that isn't my art practice, like maybe crafting something badly, like it's just the working with your hands and the new brain pathways that happen. Like we all deserve and have a right to these tools.
yes. Something that's coming through in response to part of what I just heard you talk about is an elder once said to me that participation is ceremony.
Mm.
That, and I love that you're touching in on this. Like, yes, there are opus works, there are masterpieces that like resonate through time, and that it's not really about all of us making those, forever resonant, opulent masterpieces. And that can hold a lot of us back from creating. But another piece that's coming through is that, and I think somebody said this, but I can't remember who. Maybe I'll find it and tag it later. But like, we are the art. Like, what happens when you engage in something that expands your edges of what you believe is possible or what you believe you can do, and you sort of step outside of those roles or identities, and like you're talking about, like it's like working with something, like crafting something with your hand, the breakthrough where you're crafting something badly and creating new pathways of sight, new pathways of engagement with yourself. And we become the masterpiece when we are willing to engage in those things that expand the bandwidth, or expand the yeah, the palette, if you will, of what we think is possible about ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm getting excited now when you're talking about that because I'm just thinking about the like incredible art that is human consciousness and just I believe that we all have the seed of like the Buddha in us, that can come to fruition in our lifetime. And it's so incredibly beautiful. There's that word beauty, like how the human consciousness can unfold in a life. And it's so sacred, it's so important, it's so fleeting and tender, and something that just breaks my heart is when you um meet people. Maybe we have family members that are like this, or friends, or even just sometimes you see people on the street that are really struggling with like addiction or mental health, and that like their seed kind of got cramped and has stopped expanding, and it's like, oh God, it's like it feels like such a waste. And yet, like, you part of being a human is like accepting you can't really save everybody, but there I feel that desire, like to just have us all be be the Buddhas, and I more and more these times that we're living in, it kind of feels like the sense of getting closer. I don't know if you feel that, just this sense of this kind of conversation becoming more and more mainstream, and um I don't know, like a tide turn. I like to think so.
That's beautiful. Um, I saw a thing from Mammy Onami yesterday. Do you follow her
Yeah,
at all?
I do, yeah.
Um, I love her. Um, um, she said something that I was like, yeah. She was talking about peace and how there won't be peace on earth. And
Mm,
that can sound so like, mm, it can sound however it sounds. And I'm not saying I'm landing anywhere, but it's a thing that I've noticed as well. I just haven't landed anywhere on like what it looks like. Because yes, I would say that this conversation is moving more into accessibility.
mm,
Um, and I'm always walking this line of like what is truly kind and like what is like how can I participate in this world in the suffering in a way that is truly kind.
mm,
Um, and I appreciated Mammy Onami's perspective on like there's a tension here that will actually never really be resolved. And I feel like this is really part of this community ministry art conversation. Like the tension that will not be resolved that really actually keeps you catalyzing deeper into it. Like
mm,
my desire for the more beautiful world that we know is possible, actually keeps me moving deeper into how I am actually of service
mm,
and getting more honest with myself about it and more potent and more directed in my actions. Um, and still asking myself, like, what is my right size for participating in the direct suffering that I witness. For a long time, I did a thing called Art for Food, where I would invite artists to come together, and we would create a community event and raise kind of a bunch of money. Like they would take a good portion of it home because I don't really believe that folks should do things just for exposure or to like just like we all need food on the table, but
mm,
a good portion of whatever would be raised would go kind of in a kitty that like when we saw people we would make or sorry, we would go to like grocery stores and buy food cards, like food gift certificates, for grocery stores or for other kinds of things, and like have a bunch of these cards that would be handed out when we saw people. And it was beautiful. And I noticed it didn't persist. Like it went on for a long time and it didn't persist. And I've been asking myself lately why, and you just kind of like re-excited it. And I don't have an
mm.
answer. Um,
Interesting. That's making me think of something I was just talking to somebody about, because I was helping a friend build a cob house this past week. Some people I know are who have never built a hot cob house before are building one, a little cottage to live in, and they're as happens, they're behind schedule, and so they're putting out the call to everyone to please help us finish our walls, but so we can get a roof before the rains come. So I went for a day and was building. And I was thinking about how this is like the kind of taking like, charity into your own hands, or like, um, aid, like the kind of and there's like this concept of mutual aid now that's really popular, or like direct resources being sent to people. But this is happening on like such a big scale. And interestingly, these people are also in the process of forming a church, because the woman who's going to be living in the Cobb house is a death doula, and she wants to be able to have a little more freedom with her death doula work, and a little more just ease within the tax system and all these things. And so I know all these people that are actually forming these churches for different reasons. And like I have another friend who's doing medicine work with mushrooms and is forming a church to have some protections around that. And somebody else is doing sacred sexual healing and has formed a church around that. So there's like all these churches popping up around the fringe of society. And I was like, oh, we're all kind of like forming the same church in different places. What is going on here? So to circle it back to like community aid, because I was building this woman's house with her, and just feeling like I'm seeing how these parts of society are being taken back, like the medicine healing and the death and the birth and the tantric sex, and all these things are kind of feeling established. And the piece that feels like it's not fully formed or kind of missing for me is like the charity and the aid. Most people are still receiving that, I think, from government systems, or like going there first anyways. And as we all know, like they're inadequate, and medical insurance sucks, and like like welfare is not enough, and like all these things. So yeah, kind of, I was thinking about that too. I love your idea about art for food, and I hope you get back to it. I'd love to see how it evolves.
Yeah, maybe we just do one. I mean, you and I could do one.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, I'm totally with you. I feel like this is a thing that's in a lot of Indigenous communities that I've, either been a part of or have witnessed, that is really not in this context. I can't even call this a community context. And that's part of it. I'm actually going to go on maybe a little mini sermon about community. I feel like in order to, I know, I don't know why I'm saying I feel, and to soften it. I know through my experience of companioning folks in this current Western context that very few people feel tied to community or within community. There's not a lot of sense of belonging. And in fact, a thing that I have really encountered is that this question of worth and the question of belonging are two of the biggest diseases in our current Western context. That we don't really know. If you receive a call, you're then moving it through the machine. And then it's mutated. It has mutated by that point. It's no longer in that unadulterated signal place in which like you're responding to the call. You're responding to the call and trying to figure out how to survive. And that separates us. And all of us doing that in our own little individual pods is like separating us. I know my sense, I have so much moving through me. I'm trying to like regulate it and talk at the same time. I'm gonna take a breath. To remember community requires looking to the more than human world. It requires looking to the more than human world. You touched in on this of like recognizing those moments where it actually is the thing to go against the flow. It's not the whole lifespan. Because another thing that I've really been tuning into is that a lot of us are fighting, and then we end up getting exhausted, and then we end up having to we kind of end up becoming the thing we're fighting against, either at first stages of our lives, or like we end up needing to rely on the systems that are not there, in moments where we're exhausted. And I'm curious about, I'm actually going to ask you this. I'm curious about how hope and inspiration and beauty and creativity are fuel for long-term transformation of systems, because this is not silly shit. Like I was kind of called in last month. I posted something on Instagram where I was like, the system loves rebels. Like the system loves rebels. And I got some like very spicy DMs of like, it feels like you're saying something really dangerous here, like that we shouldn't rebel. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. It's not that we shouldn't rebel. It's that when we identify so hard as being rebels, we end up becoming the thing that
Mhm.
we're fighting against. What does it look like to um, live so fully in hope, which for me is vision with expectation of that vision not only being possible, but actually here? And I would actually change the word expectation to expectancy, like with expectancy, as in there's room for something else to come in and be at play. Um, what does it look like
Mm,
to be somebody who's so emboldened in beauty that you have that direct live line to the holiness, to the
mm,
divine? That the thing that you're translating is actually infused with a kind of presence that Earth has no question about, but humans do. Like we're the only ones that question if we're worthy or what we should be doing with ourselves. And
yeah.
there's beauty to that, and there's a tension that's inherent there that Mami Onami was pointing towards. There's a tension there. There's a creative thing that actually catalyzes us into more refinement, into an ever evolving edge that will actually never be cleaned up or cut off.
Mhm.
And how can we be well in it without bypassing? Because
Mm,
this isn't like hope and love and light and like no hands, no boots on the ground, but it's
mhm,
also like coming from that for me, coming from that resourced stance in which you're walking that line of paradox so hard that it becomes non-dual. Like it becomes a way that then rings that bell for others who can see it and then also become bridges for it. But anyway, I would love to hand this over to you.
mm,
What feels real for you in that non-bypassing and yet like um, not being sucked in to the harrowing, but
mhm,
also addressing the harrowing about beauty, about hope,
mm.
about these things that we have both explicitly dedicated our lives to.
Yeah. What a great question. I want to start with bypassing because I have noticed that people bypass what they don't have the capacity to hold or be with. And, I would prefer people and myself and everyone to not do that. And at the same time, you can't really um, scold someone or blame someone for not doing something that they don't have the capacity to do. So I think with the spiritual community is it's like growing your capacity to be with the mud and the sorrow and the suffering to and like knowing how to sit with it. And that also is like not changing it and not judging it and not storyizing it, but to just start with just being with suffering and darkness, um, with even out taking any action, just to just know what it is to just be with it first and foremost. And the more that we can do that, I think the more then we can then move into action and relationship in a way that is supportive and not bypassing and maybe constructive. um, but yeah, I think with it's really easy to judge people as spiritual bypassing, and even that can be the shaming in that can then push people further away from their ability to be with something that's hard. Um so yeah, I'm really interested in that, like kind of how do we call light workers, or these people who get accused of bypassing white lady spirituality gurus, like how can we call them into just being with the sadness and creating those kind of spaces. I wouldn't say that's the work that I'm explicitly doing. There are people that are doing that work, but that is my feelings about the matter, and that's how I am addressing it myself, is like actively seeking out ways to be with suffering and to just know it and be in relationship with it without immediately moving into like a fix or a judgment, or a savior or anything like that. So that's the bypassing part. But then, yeah, if you're just with it all the time, then what happens is you get angry, you get depressed. It's natural. I mean, you're going to start to become what you're around all the time. And like, in 2020, we had all these activist movements, that was such an amazing time for that. And there's a lot of like anti this and anti that. And without the balance of what are you pro, you just only become anti. And that was something that was like really great, I thought, about the Black Lives Matter movement. It was like we had the anti-racism movement and we had the Black Lives Matter. So that was like, you had, this is very clear, like this is what we're against, and this is very clear, this is what we're for. And that felt like a nice balance for me, but like both being really important. Anyways, that's a tangent. But so yeah, not staying in the sorrow, and that circles it back to the practice, and the beauty. Because when you do have something that you're engaging with that is joyful, is pleasurable, is creating beauty, is connecting you to the timeless I am, the place beyond right or wrong, that's the antidote to the being with the suffering that's here on earth. And so important. So important to find that joy. And I'll just, share kind of, this is like maybe a sort of silly story, but from what I'm going through in my life right now, and I've told you this, my husband and we're renting this land and we're living on this tiny homes, but we're actually we want to buy our own land. And so we've been in this process of trying to downsize everything into movable buildings. Like we're living in a bus, and even the studio space that I'm speaking to you in is a vaulted greenhouse, like on skids that will drag away when we leave. So everything in our life is like being condensed and trimmed so that it can fit into these movable structures. So when we leave, we can take it with us and then hopefully build from the ground up while still having a roof over our heads. Sounds great on paper, right? But actually the reality of it is like things are leaking. Everything is messy. When I come home and like park my car and get out of the car and look at where I'm living, I feel all this sense come up a lot of the times of unworthiness. Like you were speaking, like, oh, I don't have a normal house, and what does my mother think? And I'm really actually very messy right now. I have garbage, not garbage, but like we're trying to figure out what to get rid of. And sometimes you're not sure. So the thing just ends up in front of your lawn, And so a lot of those houses that I maybe drove by and judged, like I kind of look like that right now. So I've been going through this like expansion of my identity in that. And it would be really easy to feel frustrated that I don't have the money to just move right now. I don't have the money to, I don't even have the money to just like put everything in storage and not deal with it. There's a lot of circumstances that could conspire to just, if they did conspire the right way, would be able to just like lift me out of this. And I wouldn't be like sorting through my boxes and figuring out what to get rid of. But that's not what I'm living. I'm living in this position that to some people looks like poverty, but I know it's a choice that I've entered into. But what's keeping me joyful in it is that like I am like, oh, I've created this beautiful studio in this little space, and I come here and I create beauty almost every day. And like I have these rabbits that I love. I have this amazing dog, this amazing partner. So it's like rooting back into what really matters, that is outside of this story that society might be judging or I might be judging for. And that's what the practice does. It roots you back into what's timeless, what really matters. And and helps you remember that, yeah, like you don't actually need to have your life look like what you've been told it should look like.
That wasn't silly at all. That was rad. Also, you and I have such parallel living situations. For those of you who don't know, I live on 40 wild off-grid acres in eastern Washington, eastern central Washington. And yeah, I love what you were just saying of like from the outside it could look like all kinds of things, but for us it's a choice. And it's a choice because as we lean into what we truly need and the simplicity of that, we're able to like play with so much more. We're able to make other kinds of other facets of our life highlight more. And for both of us, a lot of that is time. Like
Mhm.
we are really rich in a lot of time. And that means we live simply and we also live deeply connected with the earth.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, rooting back into what matters. I love that. Oh man, actually just I'm really enjoying listening to your brilliance. The bypass piece is so important. Bypass being what we have, what we maybe don't have capacity to hold, and that shame can push us further away. And it's one of the pieces I wish more of us could have some more conversations about of like how how much shame insidiously shapes movements, like daily personal movements, and also like how infused it is in in the movements that we make through consciousness that actually if it weren't there we would move very differently. Like things would actually like maybe more deeply take root.
Mhm.
And so what does it look like to actually be dedicated to unwinding the very quiet ways that shame infiltrates how we
Mhm.
talk, how we show up with ourselves and with each other. Um, and to highlight this soul friend tenant that you just naturally laid out of like, what happens if we can, what happens when we can be with, without story making and without fixing,
Mhm.
we can be with, um, a way that somebody who went through the first round of soul friend named this is, can I be in the dark with you without lighting my lantern? Uh,
Mm.
and something to meet this when you're in it for too long without some other complement. A piece that I understood about what this soul friend said was like, when I stand in shadow, increasingly it's more and more a fertile void. It's more and more like a fertile darkness.
Mm.
Um, and can my fertile darkness be beside somebody's sorrow? Um, and if I'm not like making their sorrow fertile, if I'm just being in my own, tending that while I'm even holding somebody else, does that have an impact? And I feel like it does. I've been experimenting with that. Like
Mm.
when I can enter into that parallel place with somebody of like I can hear their pain. I can hear them and be with them there without making their darkness my darkness. It doesn't have to be the same one.
Mm.
In order to companion somebody. Anyway, there's a lot of subtlety there that I won't get into right now, but just sort of dropping that here.
Mm.
And that practice is a way to call in that compliment, because anti without something that is pro makes us anti. Like
Yeah.
dwelling, you become what you're in, is something I heard you say. Yeah, I feel like this is forever a question of that dance of like me and we. Like
Mhm.
I'm in my art practice to tend me. I'm also in my art practice to tend the we. My art
Mhm.
practice inherently tends the we because um, witness is participation, and again, participation is ceremony. Like that
Mm.
was something I actually wanted to say when you were touching in on like not all of us are going to make the masterpiece that endures through time. And I'm like, yes, but if you can see, if you have eyes to see the masterpiece and get your inner bell rung a little bit, like you are part of that art.
Yes. Yes.
Witness is part of art. And
Mhm.
it's part of why right now these times really require more of us to step into that creator place,
Mhm.
because more of us need to remember what matters most.
Mm. Mhm. Oh, I love that about the witness. And yeah, when I was saying like let's take art out of the galleries, like let's also have it in the galleries. That's a better way to sit it and place it other places, because I've had some incredible breakdown cries in front of museums in Italy and ancient pieces of
It's
art. Yeah.
It's similar to, like, intentionally holding a women's circle. The reality isn't women's circle. right?
Yeah.
Like that is an exceptional space to enter into in order to get immersed enough to
Mm,
recognize it. And I
right.
feel like this is the thing that's a little bit lost between like the elite art world and everywhere else.
Mm,
Um, having spaces that are intentional, that are set aside, where you can go into an immersive place, like it kind of becomes a little womb in which like you're infused with just the beauty. But it's
mhm,
not just about being infused with the beauty, it's about how you step out of the gallery space.
mhm,
And does that shift how you see?
mm,
Um, what art shifts how you see so that you're tuned, you're like it's like a sound bath, or it's like again,
mhm,
it's like any other intentional space in which you're flooded, you're inundated, and then how are you going to be moved beyond a novel experience of looking at a piece of art and actually
mhm.
allow yourself to become something new through that gaze, through that witness, through that encounter?
Yeah. I mean, I just it occurred to me that the museums are they're temples. They're temples of art, you know. And but we're afraid to call it that. And then maybe that's part of what's broken though, because if you explicitly call it a temple, you're expecting some sort of transformation to occur through visiting it, and you know that that's the risk you're taking when you cross that threshold. And if it's not a temple and it's a museum, even if the physical space is exactly the same, there's more of an energy of like, I'm going to go and check this box. I saw the Mona Lisa, you know, I went to the Uffizi, I went to the British Museum. Like I've seen the great things next, you know, but you don't have maybe that threshold or that priest or priestess at the gate saying like, what are you going to do with this beauty now that how did this beauty permeate your cells and rearrange them, you know? And it'd be great if we weren't so afraid of that and we could bring that in.
This feels this feels like the crux of like why you and I do the work that we do. I feel
Mm,
like one of the things that started happening in my art classes, this happened with when I was momentarily teaching voice lessons, and almost everyone coming to me for voice lessons were talking to me about the thing that their dad said or the thing that their teacher said that like prevented them from singing, and that actually they weren't coming to me to learn scales, they were coming to me to have a space safe enough to unfurl the
mhm,
tenderness in their hearts that held them back. And when I started teaching art classes, and I was a little like trickster about it. I could have been kinder, because I kind of was just like, "Come do this portrait class," and then it'd be like, "Who are you, really?" Um, like we would do all of these contemplative art approach practices that like basically confronted the self to look at the self and then make something from it. Make proof that you went there was one of the taglines.
mm,
Like, come gaze at yourself and then make proof of what of the fact that you went there. I was like, "Man, that was that was saucy." And I'm much more, like, upfront about it now where I'm like, "Let's go into the inner world and then, like, come out and, like, bridge that gap." I love what you just asked of,
mm,
like, "What are you gonna do with that? What are you gonna do with the fact that you had a cell you were, like, touched at a cellular or cellular level? Like, what are you gonna do with that? How are you gonna be in your world differently now that you
mm,
saw, the Sistine Chapel? What are you gonna do now that you encountered one of Gabrielle Wildheart's pieces? Like, what are you gonna do with that?" Um, I love this idea of museums being, art temples where transformation is possible.
mm,
I feel like I have some visions for how I'm well, like, things I'm gonna do in the next couple of years. I wish I could just do them right now, but, like, I wanna create explicit spaces in which, like, transformation isn't guaranteed, but it's acknowledged,
mm,
and particularly as it intersects with imagination and how imagination is a technology, an organic technology that if reinstated to the human being, we will have more opportunities for, again, the world we know is possible. That it actually expands the generous reality because every great inventor has had access to their imagination.
mm,
There's a translation of the ineffable into the effable, into form. And um, if we didn't need to be, if we didn't feel like we needed to be so sterile for inclusion, if inclusion could be woven into our collective understanding of of the intimate, and transformation and creativity are very intimate. Spiritual care is very intimate. And that piece has been stripped a bit from the collective, and therefore imagination has been made distrustful, because
Right.
imagination is very intimate. It requires a trust in the encounter without like exclusively aligning specific details or like controlling the outcome.
Mhm.
And that's really hard for the current context that relies so heavily on the machine. For me, I'm not interested in necessarily commerce is not capitalism. Like it's not inherently capitalism. Commerce is actually inherently indigenous. It has
Mhm.
um,
So I love
explicit
that.
agreements. It has exchange that is right exchange. Like you're making an agreement and then honoring that agreement. It's a sharing of what you know. It's a sharing of resources in a way that's non-extractive. Like commerce is not inherently capitalistic, and I feel so strongly about that. But the machine is so primary that almost all of us are having, like I said earlier, to move our callings through it,
Mhm.
and that ends up stripping it. We're making consensus. We're making intimacy. We're moving intimacy through a consensus form instead of through like
Yeah.
through other forms that could honestly actually shift entirely how we relate to ourselves and each other. Anyway, that was a whole lot. Thanks.
Mm.
What's coming up for you?
Well, I'm keep thinking about moving intimacy through the machine. I'm like getting this kind of picture of like two people holding something really intimate and precious, and then it's almost like kind of dropping it through a meat grinder and sending it along a conveyor belt, and like it's getting processed and packaged up, and then handed to the person at the end, and they're kind of like, this doesn't feel the same, you know? Yeah. Yeah. Why do we do that? Trying to understand, why do we do that? What's the point of that? And I was thinking too about like being in art school, and I did a master's in art, and I thought it was going to be this like incredible launch for my career. And I was very, excited to get into the program. And then what I realized, and it was in London, so I got to live in London for 3 years, which was amazing. But they they were sort of shaping us into being what was currently selling at the top galleries, which is like, if this is like humans on earth making art, like that is like a tiniest little sliver of that whole picture. And most people didn't fit. And then so it was like, if you fit into that, you got A's. If you almost fit, you got B's. If you like didn't fit but like didn't rock the boat, you got C's. And then actually there was a whole lot of us, myself included, who got D's because we just didn't fit, didn't like it, didn't want to participate, rocked the boat. Yeah, it was. And it was just it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was such a disappointment, but also this realization that there was this whole space outside of that I that was much bigger and much more exciting and much more meant for me, and that it got to be on my terms. And yeah, but so this is kind of tangential to what you were saying, but just I think just like what happens when you resist putting yourself through the processor, there's actually much more available, and it is um you get to imagine it, so it's kind of limitless. Actually, it's like it's whatever you imagine. If you're going through the processor, it's a very defined route of gears and conveyor belts and ups and downs and systems, and then when you step outside of that, wow, how freeing.
Oh, that outside is limitless. Oh man. If you didn't fit and you rocked the boat, you got D's. That's like honestly, I think the thing that you just described is like our most of our current Western context. Like I
Yeah.
think like if there's a very narrow band of us that fit in the thing and like getting A's based on the machine.
Yeah. And just add to that, I'm still friends with my cohort, and most of them are not making art anymore. And um,
Fuck.
and even like of the ones that got A's, like a few of them are, but most of those have moved into curation or art management or something. But yeah, I mean, it's like most people don't fit. And for most people, that message of you don't fit is like stifling, you know? And so,
Which makes, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting
no,
you
go
because
ahead.
I forgot that I was on mute or off
Yeah.
mute. Um, it makes the need for more of us, like the way that you and I are approaching life, because I mean, for us, right? Like this is something we've dedicated our lives to. We live in this. We live in a way, even where both of us happen to live in ways in which like we get to make this primary, and it has required sacrifice, much like the salmon. Like you can go with the flow for part of your life, and then there's a part of your life in which you have to go against the thing and you will die. Like
Yeah.
there's part
Yeah.
of me that has just repeatedly died through that spawning process of like to make the thing that I'm actually here to make and not just to go with the flow. I actually have to repeatedly die.
Mm.
um, and trust this process. And I love that you were talking about, you know, the disappointment of this master's program being like the most important thing that's happened. Because it was like a catalyst into your more generous reality. It was a
Yeah.
catalyst into recognition of like, oh man, I don't know if I want to fit on that needle through that
Yeah.
little eye of a needle. I feel like, you know, there's so much more in that it can actually spill into spaces way outside of, again, it's not instead of galleries. It's not instead of where it has been sequestered, but there is, I think, a call from what I'm hearing in our conversation to acknowledge the intimate, to acknowledge the divine, to acknowledge the more that's there. Like if more space is acknowledged, more of that, then it wouldn't feel so sequestered and separate and sterile.
Mhm.
Like it went through the machine and then you get this prepackaged little thing and you're like, this doesn't feel the same. We are nearly at the end of this call. I'm curious. Let me pull up my things. We talked so much. And I have way more excitement and like could talk with you for more hours. This seems to happen in our sessions too. Is there something that you would offer as a practice for folks to consider that
Mm.
that serves as a seed as they leave this call?
What has been revolutionary for me is 1 hour a day first of something that makes my inner artist sing. And um, sometimes that hour, then you get into it and it turns into more than 1 hour. And that's really great too. But as much as possible, if I can do my art, not a commission, not something I have to do, but something I want to do first, um, it makes everything else that I have to do throughout the day feel worth it. It frames it in like, oh well, I have to write these emails or this proposal or whatever. Um, but I'm choosing to do it because it's supporting this life where I get to start my day with this deep dive into myself and in my relationship to source, and that is worth it.
Rad. Oh, I love it. 1 hour a day first that feeds my inner artist, or that makes my inner artist sing.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things that I hear from so many folks who have made art full-time profession is like, I don't have time for my art. And I love that you're coming from that, you know, touch your own well first and, you know, anchor there. And then, as you said earlier in this call, notice how you can maintain that throughout the day. Like, I'm curious if you have any suggestions for touch points of like
Mm-hmm.
how does this practice like revisit you throughout the day? Are there any mechanics to that of like how this practice of an hour first feeds you for the rest of the day?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think it's just my simply my mental health is better when I make art, and my brain, it's like like my brain has gotten organized in the right way, and that just allows me to remember better when the rest of my day. Remember to breathe, remember why I'm doing things, remember to be present. It's not like I'm perfect, but I'm setting myself up for success when I take that time first. Yeah. And I want to share too right now what's going on for that first hour. I brought this. This is earth from Moab that I collected, it's like raw dirt, and I've been learning how to grind my own pigments. So this got ground and refined into this pigment, which will then get mixed with oil or watercolor binder or something else to make art with. So I'm really just learning this new craft right now. And so my own practice isn't even a whole lot of making art. It's more experimenting and playing with something that I'm a relative beginner at. And that is feeding me so much. And especially then when I go into doing the things that are like my skills that I make my income from.
Rad. I love that you shared that specific piece of like, it's not necessarily always working on your art first thing. Experimenting with something that keeps you in a beginner place.
Mm-hmm.
That's rad.
Yeah.
I love your practice in contrast to mine because this is one of the main reasons why I wanted to start this podcast. Because for a long time, for like 15 years, I experimented with what practice looked like for me before I committed to daily painting. And I used to try to do things at a certain time of day, and I noticed for me that was not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And that when I opened it up to any time within 24 hours, I was much more sustainable. But I notice and have noticed for a long time that if I start my day with practice, with at least touching the page, it does the thing that you just named. Like my
Yeah.
mental health, my focus, my the way that I'm tuned into my day is very different when I'm starting from that place of watering and communion and connection. And it doesn't always happen for me first thing in
Mm-hmm.
the morning. Sometimes it happens later in the day, or a longer stint of it will happen later in the day. But even literally touching the brush to the canvas, like basically before I leave my studio or before I like move into the rest of my day, will shift things for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, right. So there's as many styles and approaches as there are us,
Yes.
in terms of
Thank
practice.
God.
No, seriously. As we're coming to a close, is there anything that you would like to share with us of what's coming up? Are you amplifying? Can we amplify anything for you?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not actually amplifying anything specific right now because, as I mentioned, we're sort of in this home transition, which is taking a lot of my bandwidth. But I do have a newsletter, which I would love people to sign up for. And I do periodically lead workshops. I have a Reiki training coming up. And at some point, I'm going to be teaching a in-person workshop on how to take these kind of pigments and turn them into a watercolor palette that you can take home. So those are the kind of things that you would find on my newsletter.
Rad. I will update the description down below with your website so folks can easily find that. Rad.
Great.
Wow. So wonderful to hear you and to hear your wild heart and mind. I really, really appreciate everything that you shared with us. For those of you,
lots of zzz.
I know, me too. I'm like, well, what am I gonna do with it? Probably gonna go paint, actually. For those of you who are interested in continuing on staying engaged with Practice Live, you're so welcome here every month. We usually meet on the third Friday of the month, but it's Gabrielle's sweetie's birthday on Friday, so we moved it up to Monday. Next month, who do we have? One moment. I have it in a weird spot. Oh, I believe it's going to be my sister, my sister Stacy, who is going to talk about her movement practice. And that should be on the third Friday of the month. I will share more through my newsletter. And I've referenced Soul Friend a couple of times. And so I'm going to spend just a moment talking about that because Gabrielle will be starting Soul Friend with me, I believe, next month. And there's room for either 1 or 3 more people to join us for it. Soul Friend has been reformatted to be able to be taken in 1 year. It has historically been a 2-year program because it just takes a while to let things seep in. But we're going to try an updated format of a 1-year formational process to become a presence of presence, where you are truly aware and anchored in who and how you are, and in ways that allow you to really meet another from an encountering stance versus from a teaching or coaching stance. So it's not instead of those things, but it's a way to weave in that encountering stance where you can be with somebody in the dark without fixing, or you can be with somebody in their brilliance, and just meeting hearts meeting hearts. There are 20 modules, and we move with a lot of depth, and we go kind of in a circle format. So each of you become teachers of experience as we move, because though I have been in the field for 20 years, I really trust that all of us are teachers of experience, and that when we meet together and we can really hear each other, there's so much that can be gleaned and learned. If you're curious about Soul Friend, you can reach out to me on my website, and join me and Gabrielle in a year-long, in-depth experience. And I think that will bring us to a close.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you all for being here.